We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Phoenix Media in Black and White. And my name is Denise Meridith. I'm the co-chair of the Strategic Alliance Committee of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Phoenix chapter. A lot of words, but thank you. And thank you. And I'm going to be your moderator tonight. I want to thank everybody for coming. We're going to have a full house. I was pretty excited about that. I wanted to thank Charlene Tarver. I don't know if she's here yet. She's the president of NCBW. She'll be here soon. And my co-chair of the Strategic Alliance is Marshall. Where are you, Marshall? Stand up. It's Marshall Franklin. She also has another sort of important job with the Phoenix Police Department, but you know, should keep her a little bit busy. And then I want to thank the Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications. You're going to hear from Retha at the end here. And then also Beth Nakamura back there. She helped me put this together, so let's give them all a thank you. They're our hosts for the evening. I've been a writer all my life, and I've been a journalist since, the 1990s. Okay. But anyway, here in Phoenix, I've been a columnist for the Arizona Republic. I've been a columnist for the Business Journal for 10 years. Most recently, I was a columnist for the Examiner.com for about 7 years. So I know a lot about business columns and newspapers. And I also have seen over the years what's happened to the mass media. I think I'm a strong believer in the First Amendment. I think that's as important as the other amendments. Freedom of speech, to me, is critical for our democracy. And I think it is very important for us to have an aggressive, investigative, courageous, and free press. And I think that's a little bit endangered at the moment. So I wanted to get the dialogue going and get us working on keeping the free press free. If you think about it, without television footage, you wouldn't have seen those police dogs and fire hoses, and there wouldn't have been the changes to the Civil Rights Act. If we didn't have press, we would not have seen the body bags coming back from Vietnam, and that war would probably still be going on. If we didn't have the free press, we would not have known that there were Black people dying in a coliseum during Katrina, because the media found that out before the government did. So the media is very important to our freedom, to our livelihood, to our way of life here in the United States. But what's happened is we've had budget cuts, staff cuts, increase in social media, and there's starting to be a divide that's growing between the media and the people in the community. Someone may write a letter now to the editor, but they have no idea who the editor is. Okay? They may, meanwhile, someone in the media there may be an issue and they want to hear from somebody. They're going to call the same person every time, the one Black person that they know. Okay? The one Hispanic leader that they heard of. And sometimes represent that as representing everybody in that group. So I think we need to have a little more intermingling. We need to have a little more exposure to each other. And sometimes they don't call at all. And they're not here, so I can talk about them. But Phoenix Magazine, I hope they're not here. No, Phoenix Magazine, this sort of got my ire up a little bit ago. This is 50th anniversary of Phoenix. And they have a big cover here with a lot of pictures. The only African Americans on here are Charles Barkley. Not that I don't like Charles Barkley, okay? And who else? Larry Fitzgerald. Sports is very important to me. That's my job. I teach sports marketing for ASU. But I want to see African Americans on something besides the sports page as well. And that's been my whole goal in life, to make sure that African Americans and Latinos are represented on all the pages, not just the sports page. And there are a lot of people here in town they could have put on here, Calvin Good, Clovis's dad, for instance. There are a lot of people who have made a big difference here in town that we need to pay attention to. But what I want to do is, we're not going to solve any of those problems tonight. This is just to start the dialogue, start the conversation, and I'm thrilled at who we have here tonight, okay? These are the top leaders in media here in the Valley, and I love them all, okay? And I really appreciate them coming out tonight, because you can imagine the schedules that they have. Their bios are in this flyer, so get it on the way out. If you have it, you can read all about them. But what we're going to do here is I'm going to ask each one of them a question, and it's going to sort of set the tone. They'll talk about different aspects of the industry. After that, we'll have some time for questions and answers from the audience. And then almost more importantly, Beth told me they may move the chairs, but they're not going to kick us out. So I think everybody will be pretty hyped after our discussion. So I welcome you to stay around and speak, to the speakers up close and personal, talk to each other, and let's think about what we can do next. First of all, I want to start with Nicole Carroll. She's editor of the Arizona Republic. And as everybody knows, that's our main newspaper here in town. Nicole, if they think of it at all, depending on their age, people may think about news organizations like Cary Grant and His Girl Friday, or Robert Redford and All the President's Men, or even Sex and the City. Okay, this is our strange images that we have of what the newsroom is really like. Can you tell us for real what the newsroom is like, what the roles are of editors, publishers, et cetera?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and thank you for having me here. Whoops, okay, let's see if I can figure this out. I'm just gonna leave that alone. Just gonna bend down. Like I said, I'm editor at the Arizona Republic and AZ Central. Thank you. I'm also part of the USA Today network, which is new. If you know USA Today, we own 107 newspapers across the country. So I'm the Southwest editor. So not only do I'm responsible for the Arizona Republic, but if anything happens in the Southwest, I'll help get that covered. And we have news properties in New Mexico and Utah that I oversee. So it's really exciting and a real honor, and again, happy to talk through what that means. So as an editor, I set the strategic direction of our news operation. I oversee all daily news operations and our opinion staff. And as editor, I have three main goals. I want to, and I love what you said about watchdog journalism. That's number one, is we have to continue that tradition of watchdog journalism, investigative journalism. It's one of my top priorities. Two is I firmly believe in community leadership, which again, I'm thrilled to be here today and hope to meet many of you. I think that's a role we have as the state's largest media. We have an opportunity and an obligation to help lead the community and help provide solutions and help provide connections to our community. And then three is digital growth. That's our future. If we don't grow digitally, if we don't gain that audience, we won't be here to be the watchdogs and to be the community leaders. So those are the three main goals in my newsroom. The different roles. We have department heads, we have a sports editor and a features editor, but they're doing all kinds of different things now. In the past, they may be worried about the features section or the sports section. Now they're overseeing everything for digital, for social. We're putting on events. That's a new outreach that we're doing, that we're bringing our personalities and our expertise out to public events. We have editors who do assign and edit our news. It's important. The quality, the integrity, the ethics of our work is very important, and we have editors to uphold all of that. We have producers and planners. So if you think about it in two tier, the editors are really working with the reporters on content, and then we have producers and planners figuring out where does that go. Because we don't want anybody thinking, oh, I'm writing for the sports section tomorrow. It's like, no, you're writing for a digital audience right now. So we have producers and planners that sort out, okay, this is gonna go on mobile at this time, desktop at this time, it's gonna go on social here, we're gonna put a video here, we're gonna tag a bunch of different news organizations so they pick it up and spread it on social. So there's a whole lot of thought about how do we reach out to our audiences separate from the content creation. We have great photographers and videographers, fabulous reporters. We have columnists, editorial writers. And one thing you may not realize is we have a whole design studio in Phoenix. It's outsourced, it's one floor away, but we do all of the Southwest and actually Western newspapers for Gannett and the USA Network out of Phoenix. So we're producing Fort Collins and Salinas and all the different Western newspapers. And then finally we have our president, Mia Parrish, who is sorry she couldn't be here today, she's traveling. But the president role is certainly head of the editorial board and making sure that the entire operation in Phoenix is a success, and she's very involved in community leadership, but her main priority is on the business side and on the revenue side of things in addition to the community leadership. So that's how we divide and conquer.
Great, thank you very much.
That helpful?
Yes,
okay,
very
good.
Next we have Ilana Lowery, who's been a friend of mine for how long? We won't talk about it. Yeah, it's been a long time. I alluded to it a little earlier, Ilana, but the print media in particular is going through hard times. And I don't need to tell you about that. But can you list for the audience some of the challenges that are facing print media and how that is affecting inclusion, diversity, how you select your stories, and most importantly, what does it look like? Where is print media headed in the future, and how is that going to affect us? In 5 minutes or less.
In 5 minutes or less. Okay, thank you, Denise. And again, thanks for having us all here. So where do I start? Basically, the internet has destroyed the media. That's really what it boils down to. The internet is a wonderful thing, don't get me wrong, but we weren't ready for the changes that it brought with in terms of the media and what to expect. So we're kind of reeling from that and trying to get back to where we need to be. The internet really is where we need to be. Digital, as Nicole mentioned, is a goal for all of us. And so when you talk about the print media, I'll back up a little bit. Some of it has to do with what kind of publication you are. So in our case, we're a business-to-business publication. We, in print, come out once a week, but we're really 24/7 digitally, which is pretty much what we all are now. And in order to do that, you really need to be cautious and careful about the journalism that you're producing. I think, content is king, and we all want good journalism, we want good watchdog journalism, and that's hard to come by in a world where everybody wants everything immediately. And that's partially what the internet created, was that sense of, I want it now, and reporters need to take a little time to do their stories, right? They need to talk to all the right people and do all the research, and that's hard to do when there's a deadline looming of 30 minutes from now or 45 minutes or whatever. And so it's been challenging. That's probably been the biggest challenge, for newspapers, having everything, and I'm sure Nicole can speak to this too, having everything available to everybody. The other issue, the bigger issue, is we gave it all away for free. And we have to now try to put the cat back in the bag, and that's really hard to do. So when you hear terms like monetizing content and paywalls and all of those things that might make you shudder, knowing that at some level all this information was available to you for free, well, the reporters still need to be paid, and the lights still need to be on, and the print publication still needs to be printed, and somebody needs to still edit all that copy. And so, at one time, nobody had a problem paying for a subscription to a newspaper. And so they were paying for good content. And I think what the industry really needs to do is to find a way to get back to that place where people are again willing to pay for fair and accurate and solid journalism. And we were talking about this before. I kind of think maybe this political cycle is causing the pendulum to swing just a little bit back towards the idea of wanting that really solid, good journalism. So I'm still going to put all of my money on good content. Where it goes, how it gets to you, that's all changing, and it's all going to continue to change. But what hasn't changed is good journalism. And so if we continue to do that, and readers are willing to pay for that, then we go back to having that model of, the masses being not having the masses all in control all the time of all the content, which is kind of what social media has done to us as well. So that's more than 5 minutes. And
no, you did fine.
I could go on forever.
Good job. Julia's next. Julia has a lot of jobs like me, but she's president of the Patrick Media Group. She's publisher for Frontdoors News, director of Arizona Nonprofit Academy, and a few other things. But Julia, and I've been to some of Julia's classes, which she tells people how to get in touch with the media, which is really important. People out here have a story, and I know we've all talked about it. How come there's never any stories on this issue? How come you never see any Latino businessmen? And how come blah, 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 blah? But people may not know how to get that story in. So I wanted Julia just to talk about some of the best ways of getting your story actually out. It's not, as you're hearing, there's a lot of changes now. It's not that easy as it used to be. It's just sending in a press release, and that's it. It doesn't happen anymore. So Julia, why don't you talk about some of the ways people can get attention to their issues?
Well, thank you for having me here. And I'm a product of good information, and I live my life sometimes in error with bad information. And I always go back to the ancient caveman dwellings and drawings that we had. And if you go back and you look at how humanity has communicated, we've talked about the same things we talk about today. Basically, the hunt, how we're going to feed ourselves, who's zooming who and who's cheating on whom, right? And we talk about things that matter on the base level of humanity. And so while the way that we are changing how we're communicating, the basic messages are still there. You know, we have this horrible saying in media, if it bleeds, it leads. It's a horrible thing, but I think in many ways, that is what has driven some of our changing ways that we communicate. And what I find interesting in the practice of media today is that we are still telling stories. And interestingly enough, we have to tell more stories because we have, as they say, a 25/8 news cycle. It's not 24/7, it's 25/8. And so there's a lot of feeding that has to go. We have to feed the beast, if you will. And what I find is that there are a lot of people out there, for-profit, nonprofit, social justice, you name it, fashion, all the way to celebrity coverage, that are expecting the media to find them and search them out. And the ones that are successful at telling their story know how to tell their story, and they know how to communicate. They know how to be fearless and pick up the phone, not just send an email and not just send a press release. And so it goes back to those cave drawings. It's about relationships. It's about knowing who to talk to, what's the right fit. We were just talking about, before we got started, a venerable publication in town that is probably, I remember it since I was a child, you know, the Jewish News. If you were associated with that culture and that history, you had a niche, you had an outlet to talk to. And those are things, you know, like the Campbell family, and they've had an amazing niche and have honored their public and their constituency. But it boils down to relationships. And that is what we are missing. And so for the young journalists here, or some of you students that might be involved in PR, you need to have a stronger list than just a database or an email list. You need to be going to things like this, networking, coming up, introducing yourself, and talking to the people that make the decisions. And that will not go away. Our mediums might change, but the need to tell stories and the need to communicate and the need to push an agenda is there. It's just a function of how we manage that stewardship. There are many new ways with the digital age in which to communicate. You need to be precise, you need to be fearless, and you need to be able to understand what the editors are working with. The closer you align your message and the delivery of your message to the way that the publishers are accepting their information, the stronger of an opportunity you have to tell your story.
Andy is up next. Andy is works for ABC, so that's network television. And Andy, we certainly see a lot more African Americans on television than we have in the past. And Susan Casper, who is here somewhere, is a good friend of mine, Daphne Monroe. There are a lot of popular African Americans at ABC. But do we still face the same challenges in network TV as we do in print? And so maybe you have more people who are visible, but maybe they're not in the front office, maybe they don't make the decisions, et cetera. Or are there different hurdles in TV than you encounter in print media? And how do you feel, or why do you feel ABC maybe has been more successful than some other mediums?
Well, you know, I think it's important for us to, when we look at our communities, to figure out who are the people in our communities. And if we're not representing our communities accurately, you know, with the diversity in our communities, then shame on us. You know, we have such a rich population here of a great diverse population. So one of the things that we want to make sure is that in order for us to accurately portray our communities, we have to have the people that make the decisions, the people that are on air, the people that are behind the scenes, that are diverse, that can help make some of the decisions in our newsrooms and our coverage that we have each and every single day. You know, and it really starts off, you know, with our editorial meetings. You know, each morning we meet and we talk about the issues that are affecting our community. And that's why I'm such a big proponent of making sure that we have diverse group of people in our editorial meetings because we all bring different perspectives. I'm Latino, and I was born and raised here in Phoenix, and I have a really good perspective of my community. I have a vested interest. I live here. My kids, go to school here. So in order for me to, when they watch TV, I want them to see some of the issues that affect them. And then, I think one of you mentioned earlier about, I think Denise mentioned earlier about one of the big things that we are very strict about is making sure that we have diversity, not only, in our newscast, or actually behind the scenes, but in our newscast as well. We actively seek out people, diverse people, to make sure that we are, like for instance, like if we're doing a story about the flu, and it doesn't have to be, the hot topics that are out there. I think journalists sometimes forget about some of the basic things that we do each and every single day. So, for instance, if we're doing a story about the flu, what doctors, African American doctors or Latino doctors, can we seek out to talk about that? Because just because I'm Latino doesn't mean that I don't get the flu. So some of the basic principles that we talk about in our editorial meetings are some of the basic principles of journalism that we have to be active and conscious and aware of when we cover our community. So yes, we need diversity in our newsrooms, and it's important for us to be diverse in our decision making because, again, we're doing a big disservice to our community if we don't reflect those people in our community.
Very good, thank you. Cloves Campbell Jr. is next, and I've known Cloves for 20 years or so since I moved here. He's carrying on a legacy of a very, very important family here in Arizona. They have the oldest African-American newspaper here in the state, and he's also a former member of the Arizona House of Representatives. Cloves, the black press is endangered as well, as we've had discussions about that. How are the challenges that the black press faces differ than the rest of print media? And there are a lot of people saying now, well, what do we need black newspapers for? Anything you say that has black in it, people are now saying that's reverse racism and we should all work together, be together, blah, blah, blah. So can you tell us a little bit about what role the black press continues to play today?
I get the tough question, right?
No.
Well, first I want to thank Charlene and yourself, Denise, and Marshall and 100 Black Women of Phoenix for putting this event on. I think it's good that we have this discussion, and we've been talking about it for 45 years in my newspaper, so it's nothing new. To talk about the black press and the fact that people say we've been dying, they've been saying that for over 150 years, but yet we still survive. Some of the challenges that are happening with the daily and mainstream newspapers, we've been fighting those challenges the whole time. Less advertising, people telling us that we don't need to be around. Those things aren't true because the need for the black press is important. I think it's important that everyone get news from different perspectives so that you can understand what's really happening. If you listen to Fox News all the time, you will be the dumbest person in the room. I think that you really have to understand that it's more important that you get your sources from different places so that you can compare the news that you get. When you talk about the black press and the fact that what we try to do is talk about issues in the community that you don't see in the daily news. And it's true, that's why we're here now. The mainstream media hasn't been able to, well, it really hasn't wanted to tap into the black community to get that news. And that gives us an opportunity to have a full market that we can work on. The only problem is that when it starts to come time from the advertising agencies to work with us, then they don't want to recognize us. They can find us for press releases, but they can't find us to spend money. And I think that's the biggest issue that we face right now, and we've been facing it for a long time. As far as those other issues with digital issues and fighting the internet and all those are things that everybody has to embrace. And what we try to do is inform people and get that news to them in whatever platform they utilize to get information from. So if you get it on the internet, if you get it on your cell phone, if you get it wherever, we're gonna get it to you. But we still make sure that we print our newspaper every week. Because as people say digital is going to die off, if it's not in print, then you don't have anything of record to hold on to. And as you know, if you go to the IRS and they say, do you have your receipts? You got to have copies of receipts, printed receipts. If you go and you ask the president where's his birth certificate, they want to see an actual document on a printed piece of paper that says he was born in the United States. So when we talk about black media and what we do, we record black history every day, but we record it from our perspective. So you might hear 1,000 stories on different other media sources, but you can be guaranteed that when you hear it and read it in our newspapers, it's coming from the source that you can really trust when it talks about the issues in the African American community. I'll give you an example, talking about black history. McGraw-Hill, I don't know if you've heard this story about them deciding that they're going to print their latest edition of textbooks for students in high schools. And in those textbooks, they kind of changed the history of blacks moving to this country. Instead of us being enslaved and put on ships and captured, they decided to tell the students that we migrated to the United States in search of jobs. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't recall my ancestors buying no ticket on no ship and asking to work for free for many years and get their heads whipped at the same time. You know, we can't have those kind of stories. This was actually a textbook. We had to go back and fight to get them to stop printing this textbook. And if you let people continue to tell the story the way they want it to be told, at one point people start believing it. So you have to have the right perspective on things. And I think that's where the African American newspapers come into existence. Now, are we dying? We've lost some papers, no doubt. But we still have, I was former president of the chairman of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. We have 205 newspapers in our association right now. And so we're strong. We're continuing to fight the struggle. You know, everybody talks about the problems with, you know, how do we digitize and monetize digital. I think that that's going to figure itself out, but we just got to make sure that we survive. As far as downsizing and things like that in your offices, we've been downsizing every week. So it's no new challenge to us to be able to have to fight about that. So we've struggled with some of the things that some of the major newspapers are starting to struggle with now, but we still maintain. And I know they'll be able to maintain. I think it's just a chance that we learn how to integrate every platform that we have. But the black press is important just as the Latino press is important, just as the Asian press is important, just as the Jewish newspapers are important. The perspectives you get from every different type of source is more important than getting your source from one place. So we try to make sure that we give people the perspective of the black community from the black community.
Fantastic, thank you. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get to Retha plays many different roles here at ASU, including one is mentoring the National Association of Black Journalists chapter here at ASU, and I've been a member of NABJ for as long as I can remember. And again, as Clovis was saying, it's a very important organization to keep the discussion alive. But Retha, tonight I want you to talk about, you see a lot of students out there in the audience, talk to a little bit about the future that they may face or want to face in journalism. I try to keep being encouraging, but maybe you can be more encouraging about that. You know, what's the potential there? What advice that you have for them that want to pursue careers and the things we're talking about?
Right. There's no secret that the media are facing all kinds of challenges, you know, from the internet, and, you know, I was a pioneer in bringing the web, you know, up, and so I apologize for ruining your business. But the minute I heard about the web and read the prototype issue of Wired magazine, I knew that it would change everything, and I was so excited because finally we could democratize information and getting news out to the people, but also to have people contribute to it. And that's exactly what's happened. It's created challenges, of course, for traditional media, whether it's the African American press, broadcast, or print, certainly. But I think overall it's been a good thing. And it's allowed many more voices to come into this very respected industry. As young people, we can be journalists or be media professionals in so many more ways than we could even 20 or 30 years ago. My former editor at the Washington Post is now a professor here of ethics at the Cronkite School, and I think about when he hired me back in just how competitive it was to be one of those few people to be selected to work at a place like the Washington Post. But now people are creating new and influential media outlets. I mean, BuzzFeed is competitive. I was reading some articles over the weekend. I think it was the Washington Post article about Mr. Trump's dealings with charities and how he would raise money from other people and give it away as, from his charity. And they quoted one statistic that was first reported in BuzzFeed. So you have BuzzFeed, you have blogs that have become very influential. You have people who are creating their own YouTube channels. Many of my students are interested in entrepreneurship in terms of how they can become their own media conglomerates, really. I was reading a proposal from a student today who said not that she wanted to create a cooking show, but she wanted to create a whole business and industry around this concept of how do you feed college students in a healthy way, but that's inexpensive. So she's thinking as an entrepreneur and not just one form of the media, but all forms of the media, and I think that's what young people have to do. I have so many African American and Latino students who come to me because they see that there is a need in Phoenix and certainly in the rest of the country in terms of how do you cover the community in a way that's more, it could be more visible, that our perspective on the news and what's going on in this country is elevated, because we see that, or we've seen that over the past 20 years, we've seen a decrease in the number of journalists of color working for mainstream publications. I mean, at one point, I think we were up to about 15–16%, and we've fallen back to about 11 or 12% now. And you see the consequences of that when coverage of Ferguson, Baltimore, and St. Paul and Baton Rouge, when we don't have those voices and people on the street who really understand that community. And we need to make sure that we're supporting the African American press, but also that we're holding media professionals and the owners of media companies accountable to make sure that their reporting staffs and their decision-making staffs reflect the community. We were talking amongst ourselves on our Facebook page with the Arizona Association of Black Journalists about an incident that happened last week with a woman who was shot on the 51, going home at 7:20 in the evening, shot in the head as she's talking on the telephone to the police, saying that a car was, or a van was chasing her, a truck was chasing her. And I've been watching this, and only a handful of publications have even reported her name, and the Arizona Republic was one of them, Fox 10 and I believe AZ Family. And 2 or 3 days later, we're still not getting this woman's name. She was a professional. She was a mother of 3. She had survived breast cancer and now was fighting it again. And I'm wondering, as an African-American woman, was she targeted because she was an African-American woman? Was it just coincidence? But we're not following up on those very important issues like that is extreme importance to me as an individual and to the rest of the community. So the opportunities are great. And I think I'm pleased by the fact that so many of our students are thinking about monetization, thinking about how to create businesses and sustain those businesses, and thinking outside of the traditional business model of advertising. And I've got some amazing ideas I'd love to share with the African American press. I think I've figured out a way to make some money, and I'd like to pass that on to you guys. Been working on this in my head for years. I think I've got it now.
Thank you very much. Well, let's have a hand for our panel here. I think we have a microphone. Beth was promised to be a microphone up here. And we'll have people who want to ask questions just to come down that main aisle there. Form a line. Questions? Come on, guys. Yeah, okay. You're supposed to be investigative reporters here. Yeah, right. Let's hear it. We need to encourage people.
Got to adjust this.
Oh, nobody else will be able to talk.
All right. Well, first of all, good evening, and thank you all for coming here. I really appreciate it. Actually, I just moved here from New York, recent college grad in media, so it's pretty amazing to be here. My question is, I've noticed you mentioned the divide between social media and news. There seems to be a big gap in misinformation. People get excited with a headline, and before they even click on that link and read the headline, that has hit viral status within moments. And now people are running with a headline versus the actual content. So how do you challenge that misinformation of people just jumping on a headline versus actually finding and digesting that quality news you speak of?
I would say that that's been a tradition in the print media from day one. When you think about newspapers had to be physically sold one-on-one, person to person. And if you think about boys, generally children, that would stand and sell, printed pieces, and that really came from Europe to the U.S. It was a headline. And going back to that, if it bleeds, it leads, they tended to be salacious. They weren't always true. And because we had such a narrow ownership field in media, a lot of times stories were, changed or not really authenticated. Mm-hmm. So I think that we have to build more credibility and understanding within the readership as to what is salacious and what's important. To Cloves' comment, if you just build a population that's going to track one type of media, like Fox or whatever, you're going to get one view. And so it's incumbent upon all of us to be pushing different views, because otherwise we fall prey to that very problem. Yeah, thank you for that. It's a good question.
It's a good question.
I would just add, we try to set the example that it won't go online until it's right. If you're wrong, you're not first. It just will not go up until we're 100% sure it's true. But I would ask for all your help. That when you see things on Facebook that are just completely wrong, is to go in the comments and say, you know what, this isn't right. I try not to do that because it looks like I'm just doing it for my own publication, but it makes me crazy. And so I would really encourage you guys, challenge people and say, hey, that's not what the facts say, or here's the actual public document, or here's a video of the hearing. Get it right. It makes me mad.
Yeah.
If I can add to that, I think it adds to the credibility issue of traditional publications and people that have a legacy with the business that they're in. I always give an example that everybody has an opportunity to be an outlet, and you got to understand who it's coming from. You've got a TV show called A Dog with a Blog. So if a dog can have a blog, then you can understand what's going on. And so you really have to look at your source, where it's coming from, because like I said, anybody can put anything out about you. The difference between a news source that has a credibility label to it, like the Republic or the Arizona Informant, is that we get sued if we put something out there that's crazy. Somebody that's out there throwing stuff on the internet, they might not even put it in their own name. So, there's a lot of difference in what happens and where you get your news source from. And I encourage you to dig deeper. Once you see that headline, look a little bit more, find out other sources that are talking about the same thing and see if you get the right story.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question.
I'm just gonna do this. It's okay. Oh, thanks.
There you go.
Hi. So we were talking about diversity in the media, and how there's the Jewish press and things like that. I'm just wondering, what do you feel is most important about getting religion into the media? What can happen with that, I guess? And that's kind of an open question, but I mean it to be that way. So.
Well, I don't know a lot about the Phoenix Jewish News other than what I know. And a lot of what they produce is cultural. The stories are not so much religion-based as one side or the other, but it's a very cultural type feature story or something like that. So, for that particular publication, I also was familiar with the Catholic Sun. which is, I mean, they're filling a need, or they're filling the need for a particular audience. The Jewish News is filling a need for a particular audience. The Business Journal is filling a need for a particular audience. So I think if those subscribers are looking for that information, it's okay for it to be in that publication. I don't know that it's appropriate for the Arizona Republic, on the other hand, to maybe do those same kinds of stories. I don't know, I could be wrong, but I mean, it's a little more general in terms, here. You tell me what Well,
I'm glad you asked that question. I'm glad you brought up religion, because I think diversity is all kinds of things. It's religion, and it's ethnicity, and it's all kinds of things. And we try really hard, because we can't have the expertise in everything. We can't be the Catholic son. We can't.
Right.
But we want to learn, and we want to hold a mirror up to ourselves and see how we're doing. So we have something called diversity dialogues, where once a quarter, maybe a little bit sooner, we invite in diverse communities to come in and critique us. And we all sit there, and they go through the paper, and they go to our online site, and they look at our social media. And we've had Muslim groups come in, to your point about religion, and really talk to us about what they see and how we're doing and how we could do better in the stories that we're missing. We've had people with disabilities come in. We've had Asian Americans and African Americans, and it's fabulous, because we can't be everything, but we are responsible. We must learn as much as we can, and we must reflect our community the best we can. So I find that really helpful. So I'm not saying we wouldn't do those stories. I'm saying we need to know about those stories.
But you also have to have both sides of those stories.
Oh, you're talking about just from an editorial,
Yes.
like an opinion standpoint.
Yeah,
No, we're going to be more, balanced on the news side, but it's important that we tell those stories. And so my plea out there today is, I've got all my cards here, is help us tell those stories. So if, we don't know unless you tell us. It's kind of like what you were saying. We try to monitor all the sources that we can, but it's a big world out there, and we're getting a smaller group. I think you would agree.
If I can add, in the black press, the religious news is a big part of our newspapers. And if you look at any black newspaper in the country, we have a section that has probably 40, 50, sometimes over 150 churches listed, because that's where black people go to find out where they want to go to church. They want to find out news about what's going on in their churches. It's a big deal. The black newspapers were initially distributed in black churches throughout the country. So that's where the news comes from, and we get a lot of our news from there now. We do at least 4 or 5 pages a week, and it's not just Baptist or AME or CME or Black Catholic. It's a little bit of everything. But it's an important piece in the black newspapers.
Thank you for the question. Next.
Hi, my name is Jessica. I'm a senior here at the Cronkite School. So recently I've been reading a lot in the news about the divide between the desire for things like safe spaces and trigger warnings on campus, and then the other side of that believes that these are attacks on free speech. And in a lot of these arguments, race seems to play a big factor. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this tension between the two camps that we see in the media.
I'm sorry, what 2 camps again? I didn't hear the first part of that.
Between people who think that trigger warnings and safe spaces, those types of things on campus are a positive thing, and then people who think that they might be attacks on free speech or limiting people from expressing their opinions.
Did you say true to one?
Trigger warning.
Oh, trigger warning. You want to go first? Go ahead.
Yeah, so, this is an issue that's come up a lot lately, and my personal opinion is that at universities, this is where young people particularly learn to express themselves, and freedom of speech and opinion should be the core of what a university is all about. And I think any attempt to restrict that just raises and causes a lot of problems, and I think that people should be able to discuss all kinds of issues, be able to look at films and read books, because there's that thin line between saying that this might cause stress and trauma for people and banning books or banning movies. And I think that we have to be able to dissect them and talk about them and the context in which a lot of those books or movies were made. I mean, if you look at Huckleberry Finn, if you look at, Last Tango in Parrish, you look at a lot of classic books, movies that when they came out, Sweet Sweetback, I think is one that was discussed, here recently, the context and the time in which those books and movies came out, you have to be able to discuss those in an intellectual way. Sure, a lot of those movies, Birth of a Nation is traumatizing to me, so is Gone with the Wind. But I would not want to ban those from being discussed in a film class here at this campus or any other. And I think that we need to listen more and shout less, and I think we'll come to a solution.
I think it's a good question, and I think that it goes to the basic root of communication. And I think one of the problems that we have in American politics, and why we don't have good quality people getting into politics, we seem to get people that can just outshout and outlast, is that we don't have civility. And so my problem with the trigger issue is that horrible things happen to all different types of people. And while we do have stress, we need to back up a little bit and have more freedom to communicate so that then we can determine how we navigate towards solutions. Because I do believe that if we start to continue this polarization and this fracture, that we just create more problems. And it's are you on this side or are you on that side? And that is where we seem to be going in communications, politics, even in business. And for me, that's an extremely distressing path.
Well, also the key is to have that discussion. I think, you got to be able to have freedom of speech. That's the number one thing. And I think that at one place here at ASU, where you guys are fortunate, we have the Center for Race and Democracy, which my friend Deborah Cox here is a part of, and Matthew Whitaker started out. And it gives us the opportunity to talk about those issues on a certain platform where we can discuss them without getting irrational at the same time. But just like this issue on race and Colin Kaepernick now, we've got to sit and talk about it and not be here and try to sweep it under the table or couch his discussion about police officers shooting black people into disrespecting veterans. Those are two different discussions. But we have to talk about them and make sure that people understand and not intermingle with what they are.
Okay, thank you very much. Next.
Hi, good afternoon. I have to read my question.
That's all right.
Newsrooms are diverse, but most of the powers that be in management positions are white. How do you relay to them that these issues in the Black and brown communities are important and need to be told? How do you relate these issues to reporters who may not be sympathetic to the cause, such as Black Lives Matter?
You're right. There's a lack of diversity in some of the upper echelons of newsrooms, and it's about time for some change. There's some wonderful organizations that are doing some really great stuff, like NAHJ and NABJ, but we need to get better at the voices, the loud voices in our newsroom. And luckily, for some of us in the newsrooms, we have pretty loud voices like myself. People, there's actually, we have a good amount of diversity in our newsroom, but people will gravitate towards me. Why is this a certain way? Why is that a certain way? But we need more voices like that in order for us to represent our communities. And shame on us, again, because we are not making some of those great decisions. I think you said earlier that I think 11 or 12% of our newsrooms are minorities. And, so when you take a look around the room and you're talking about Black Lives Matter, who are the voices in your newsroom that are going to be able to give you a perspective that maybe someone else isn't thinking about? So those are the people that we need to target and people that we need to, bring up in our newsroom to make sure we have diverse newsrooms.
Can I just add just a little bit of history? Back in the 1960s, when the civil rights movement was, were in the 50s and 60s, a lot of organizations figured out that they didn't have Black reporters. They didn't have reporters who could go down and really understand what was happening in Montgomery and Selma and all those places. So they started hiring African Americans. But it was an important story that eventually many of the major news outfits, not all of them, but many of the major news outfits understood how important it was. And they assigned people like a young Dan Rather and other people to go down to the South and report on those issues. And so many of those reporters on the broadcast side and the print side became the iconic people that we study and know about now, because they were on the most important story of the 20th century. And the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Chicago newspapers, and of course the black media, understood just how important this story is. And we're back today in that same place where this is an extremely important story. And we wish we had more diversity in all aspects of media, but if people at the top are too idiot to understand how important this story is, then they're going to miss out, and they're going to miss explaining what's happening to America in the 21st century. This is a sea change. We know what the demographics are. We know what's going to be around in 2050. We've all read it. And you need to get ready. There are a lot of things that we're not reporting on. Not only Black Lives Matter, we're not reporting enough on the great tsunami, the aging of the baby boomers, and the fact that, America will be the 5th oldest country in the world in another 15 years, and how that's going to manifest itself. We're not talking enough about the 1% controlling so much of our wealth and what's happening to people who are being left behind. We're not even talking about the age of automation and the rise of the robot and what that's going to mean for future, for our children as they go into industries that so much of it will be automated. There are robots that can write stories. There are robots that can pick vegetables. There are robots that can work in fast food and make hamburgers and coffee better than the barista at Starbucks. So what is that going to mean for the United States? We have to recognize these major stories and make sure that we have the people in place to tell them and the will to tell them, even if you don't have minorities in your newsroom. This is an important story, not just Black Lives Matter, but the whole diversity and the change in America. And we have to recognize just how it's going to change everything. And we have to report on it truthfully and without fear. It's coming, and we can't fear it any more than we fear the fact that a rainstorm is coming. It's just coming, and we have to be prepared.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to let these last people come on up, these last few.
That's easier. Good evening, panelists. My name is Jessica, and I'm a junior here at the Cronkite School. I'm actually taking a class this semester, Communications 460, with Miss Sharon Bramlett. I might have pronounced her name wrong. But we just learned about a study that was done in Denver a few years back, and how they purposefully avoided low-income areas, and they would target their main audience, which was white women from the ages of 25 to 45. I recently worked in a newsroom whose exact demographic was that. So from the early 2000s to now, not much has changed. How do we change our audience to start listening to stories of those in low-income areas?
By telling good stories? No, I mean, that's really what it boils down to, is if you're a good storyteller, you will engage your audience. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. It doesn't matter what your target audience is. If you can tell a good story, a factual story, a truthful story, you will absolutely start changing the minds of the people, the readers. And I personally think that. I mean, I could be speaking out of turn, but I really think it's about storytelling. And yeah, I think you would agree.
I would agree, but it sounds to me like that was an advertising decision. Yeah. And so if you are in a media environment that is struggling, and you know that you have a sector that you can identify, and then you can bring advertisers that want to target that sector, then that's probably what has occurred. And I think that's happening, to a lot of media outlets, myself included. We chase the money so that we can keep going, and so we need to know who it is that's responding to our publication and our news outlet, and then one feeds the other, and it kind of tends to be a vicious cycle. If you're getting, props for a certain type of coverage, you're going to continue to follow that. But if you have good stories, then that's how you grow, and that's how you diversify.
Also, if you look at, you talked about demographics and them finding where you talked about money, and that's really what it boils down to. You got to tell stories, but you got to tell stories that people want to hear. I mean, if you want to, I can write about myself and be in my newspaper every week, but they'll get tired of that. It's like who's going to be on the cover of Oprah this week, this month. You know it's going to be her. But you still have to get good stories out. One of the things we just did with NNPA about 4 years ago, which is the National Newspaper Publishers Association, was did a study with Nielsen to talk about black consumers. We had found out that we kept going to advertisers. They kept saying, there's no demographic information on your people. We said, well, we're giving you the demographic information, but for whatever reason, they didn't believe us until we came to Nielsen and partnered with them to get that demographic. We reported that their black spending power is $1 trillion this year, okay? And now, all of a sudden, they want to target African-American consumers a little bit more. So it's about the demographic, how you couch what you want to get done, but also now they're giving us information. They highlight stories of their employees because they want to target that African-American consumer. So they look for what they want and they find it. And when you talk about that demographic, just what you said, they're looking for what they want to find.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Colette Watson, and I'm a writer and communications consultant here in the area. I know some of you, Retha, and I'm really just enjoying your insight, so thank you for being here. My question is kind of related to the fact that I do a lot of work with social justice organizations, and we have conversations about media many times that are very macro and very much related to what's happening at the national level and how media can affect can feed into stereotypes or affect perspectives. When you have, for instance, an African-American victim who, when the story is reported, a mugshot is used versus a Brock Turner who is a rapist being described as a swimmer, et cetera, things like that we've seen as conversations at the national level. My question to you then is, in what ways do you ensure diversity in your newsrooms, in your editorial decisions, and fairness and balance in the ways that you report the news?
I can jump in on that. One of the main things I would really encourage for the students here at Cronkite is so many times it's the internships that get you into the media organizations, and it's the recruiting that Cronkite is doing and that Retha is doing that gets them into Cronkite to begin with. So I really appreciate Retha and the efforts they're doing to make a really diverse student class here that gives us the internships, that gives us the folks in our newsroom. It's interesting, you mentioned the percentage, Retha. I just saw there's a new study out from AS&E, and in the newspapers, the average is about 17% diversity in the newsrooms. At the Republic, we're about 22%. We have a lot of work to do, but we're happy to be above the average. It's really important to us. It's how can you tell the story of a community if you don't reflect that community? It's just impossible. And what we do to ensure that is, again, I mentioned that diversity committee that brings in, speakers and makes sure that we have, true audits of our work. But we do that every week. We have that committee. They're empowered to come in and say, I question this decision. Why didn't we cover this? And be proactive about it, not just after the fact, but in the middle of a news story, they'll say, hey, we see this mugshot going around. Let's not make that mistake. And so I think it's really important that you have people in your news organizations that are empowered to speak up, and I appreciated that they speak up to make sure that we are reflecting that community every day.
Thank you.
Good evening, panel. My name is Frank Crump. I'm with UPI Education, which is not United Press International. Listening to Retha when she was talking about the woman that had been shot made me recollect, because she was saying there was very little news by some publications on that aspect. And it made me think back. I lived abroad in Asia for more than 20 years. And when I was living abroad and would watch the news, I got great news reporting, I thought, from the BBC. And then I would also, in a hotel room, watch CNN abroad. And their news reports were not that bad as well. But when I would come back here to the States and watch CNN on TV, there was quite a disparity between what I saw abroad as they were reporting as compared to what they reported here in the US on the same topics. Is there any interest or comments that you might have as to why that disparity might exist?
That's a very good question. I unfortunately have not had a chance to see what the difference would be, but some of it would be, in my opinion, we're in a 24-hour news cycle, right? always looking for new content, whatever's happening, boom, boom, boom. And sometimes I think we get stuck in that cycle that we're always looking for something new to put on television, and it doesn't matter what it is sometimes. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's not good content. So I think that because of the need for news and the need for 24 hours news cycle, I mean, when I grew up, there was no CNN. There was just, regular, ABC, NBC, and CBS. But now we're starting to see that the evolution of people's need for news, and to be quite frank, I think sometimes it's just could be filler time too. So that's could be one of the reasons.
I can agree with that, and the need for the news as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Frank. We'll have one last question. Okay.
Hi, my name is Veronica, and I'm a freshman at Cronkite. And personally, I believe diversity in the media is more of a topic right now, rather than kind of embedded in stories and perspectives of journalists. I don't know if it's a common belief. But my question is, what advice would you give to reporters so that they can almost begin to integrate diversity naturally with their own journalism while still remaining objective?
Well, I think Andy probably said it best, and that's to do it naturally is reporters need to know who's in their community, and they need to know who they're talking about, who they're writing about, to be out there with them. I know Julia talked about relationship building. It's all part of that. It's becoming, reporters need to become part of the fabric of their community, and in Phoenix, this community is diverse. You wouldn't necessarily know it if you were a stranger coming in and seeing our media in action for the first time, one newscast here or one newspaper article there. It is something that we all, I think, are working really hard to develop, change, but that's really what it boils down to, is you have to become part of the community, whether you're a reporter or an editor, it doesn't matter. You have to embrace everything and everyone around you, and then you can naturally, that's hard to do, but I think over time you can organically create the kind of news stories that that everybody wants to read.
What I found out is that regardless, after a while, reporters get comfortable writing about things that they get comfortable in and the things that they do. And I found it as I'm bringing in new young reporters, they're more apt to go out and go wherever I ask them to go. Whereas my older people, they're going to say, well, no, I don't want to go there. And it's not a race thing. This is just, I think, once people get comfortable as reporters, they do what they want to do. And unless you can force them to go out, the good ones are going to do everything that they can. But some people get complacent and get in the place where they are. So it's about making sure. I like getting younger people now. That's my goal. We're trying to get more young faces in our publication because they don't want to see older people all the time. They want to, if people see themselves in a newspaper, they're more apt to pick it up. And specifically with young people who don't see themselves in publications that much. So we're trying to get more diverse by bringing more young people to write about young things that are happening. And that way we're also bringing in a new demographic and making sure we have some readers for the next 20 years.
Great, thank you.
And,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, there are a lot of strategies you can use. So if you get assigned to a newspaper in Prescott, for example, you really have to go up there and work that community. You have to go to the churches, you have to go to the community events with your business card. You let people know that you're interested in them. There's a thing that happens in a lot of major newspapers where the beat writer, the person who had your job before, will give you a list and say, when something black happens, call Reverend so-and-so. When something Hispanic happens, call, this person. And the reporters tend to pick that up and they go to the same people as opposed to just letting people know, any and everybody that you meet, that you're interested in their stories. Call me anytime. Go out once, twice a week where you're not necessarily on a story, but I'm going to go to the black church, the big one, if there's one or two in town, and just meet people, pass out your business card. Go down to the Little League game and pass out your business card. And let people know that when things happen in the community, you want to hear about that and cultivate your own sources. Yes, you can take that beginning list from the reporter who had it before, but I think you run the risk if you stop there of just, elevating certain people to the spokesperson. And we have some wannabes here in Phoenix, I'm not going to mention any names, who claim to be the spokesperson for the African American community, whether it's Black Lives Matter or other things, and it's just no proof or evidence at all that that person deserves that title. But they're the loudest in the room, so they get it. And you don't want to be that person to, stop short of what you should be doing. It takes a little bit of work, but it pays off. And also to just yourself, if you get assigned certain stories, you get assigned a welfare story, for example, just make sure that you are diverse in the photos that you take or the people that you talk to, because not all people on welfare are Black or Latino. And you just have to make it a point to say, I'm going to go out and find people who maybe go against type, because the numbers are there, and make sure that you're doing your job every single day. What did I do to make sure that this picture is true, so that we're not pigeonholing people, holding people into a certain perspective. You can't pigeonhole people into all these people are poor, all these people are gangsters, all these people are whatever are rich. It's just not the case, and you have to tell yourself, don't do it, even when it's easy and quick. But if you've done that base work, if you've done your homework ahead of time, you can pick up that phone, and you can call so many people because you've met them already.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we have one last question.
Hi, I'm Caitlin. I'm a freshman here at Cronkite. And I was involved with a nonprofit organization for a while in high school where we kind of bridged a gap between generations, us students, and actually a lot of veterans in our community. And I've kind of noticed that there's always been that divide in between any career path, like the media especially. There's a bit of a divide between the younger generations and the ones before us. And I just wanted to know how we kind of bridge that divide on both ends, just us going to you guys and you guys coming to us, if that makes any sense.
Yep, yes. We're talking about age differences within the newsroom.
Again, diversity takes all shape, and so making sure we've got a whole range of ages is really important to cover the community. And one thing I would say is, I think that veterans want to share with you. I would go up to them and say, hey, can I go on this assignment with you? And would you go to lunch with me? Will you be my mentor? And then here's the funny thing is they're going to learn from you too, and they're going to love it, and you can share your insight and your perspective. So I don't think there's a big divide. I think maybe I'm, naive, but I think it's more of a perception. But I can tell you the veterans are eager. They're so happy you're in journalism. I'm so happy you're in journalism, and we want to help you be successful. So ask, say, hey, can I tag along with you? I remember when I was an intern out in the Southeast Valley, there's a big court case, and I wasn't covering it, but the reporters were all running out, and I'm like, can I go? And they're like, come on, kid. And we all go run to the courthouse, and those are the things that really bond you and make you part of a team. So just ask and then offer, because they'll learn from you too.
Absolutely. Let me just add that I know we are more than happy to have our older reporters talk with our young ones, mostly because our older reporters do not want to use the internet and all the digital things that come with it. So as soon as they get a young person in, they're grabbing them so that they can, hey, can you use this Twitter thing for me? Can you post this on Facebook or Instagram? So I think it's a two-way street. The older people really want help, but they want to teach too. And you get more excited when you see someone that wants to be a journalist as well, and how eager they are. We've got a couple of young ladies now that they're just like sponges. Every time they walk in the room, they're like, what can we do next? And so I got a list of things for them to do. But they're really excited. Just go ask, go talk, and we'll be more than happy to. I think it's just everybody has to talk together, communication.
Ilana, did you have something you want to say? No? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Well, let's thank our panelists. And I'd say come up, see them up close and personal. They brought their cards, etc. You see up here their Twitter access. So, and on this one, if you get this on the way out, it has their emails. So we try to have it covered here on how you get a hold of them. But they're anxious to hear from you. I would also like to hear from you on what you feel we can do as a follow-up to this. What do you want to hear more about? And we'll see what we can put together in the next few months and next year. Thank you very much, everybody.